Abraham Lincoln freed all the slaves with the Emancipation Proclamation, right? Wrong. Let's find out how you've been told wrong your whole life. Welcome to Learn with Sprayberry, where we make social studies fun, easy, and educational. Today's focus is cleaning up the misconceptions surrounding the Emancipation Proclamation. We're going to dive deep into what's actually covered by the Emancipation Proclamation and what isn't. As always, we're going to start with a little bit of background. Lincoln issued a warning to the southern states in September of 1862. This warning was straightforward. All persons held as slaves within any state or designated part of a state, the people whereof shall then be in rebellion against the United States, shall be then, thenceforward, and forever free. This was a chance given by Lincoln for southern states to return to the country without losing their slaves. I know what you're about to say. But I thought Lincoln hated slavery and wanted to get rid of it. The answer's honestly complicated. Lincoln, technically, as president, didn't have the power to free all the slaves, since slavery isn't really discussed in the Constitution. Ever since the Dred Scott case, slaves are considered property, and property is protected under the Fifth Amendment. Even though Lincoln may have been against slavery, he's also a pragmatist. He knew that if he ended slavery throughout the whole country, he risked losing the support of the border states. The states that broke away from the Union weren't the only states. You can't forget about the border states. These states stayed with the United States and still had slavery. If Lincoln had passed an executive order or war act banning slavery throughout the country, he risked turning those states against him. Slavery had long existed in a gray area in our country. The Constitution doesn't actually even use the word slavery until 1865. The concept of slavery is listed under the property ideas, and the president doesn't have the power to relieve American citizens of their property. That's why he issued the proclamation. One of the powers of the president is that he's the commander-in-chief of all armed forces. That means he's the ultimate leader of the military. This offers him some additional powers he doesn't normally have. He can do anything that he deems is necessary to end a war or a rebellion. So he issues this warning specifically to the southern states. They are in active rebellion and are therefore under the purview of Commander-in-Chief. This means that they're an active enemy combatant, so he can do what he sees as necessary to end the rebellion. Lincoln decides that if we remove the issue of slavery from the South, they're going to lose one of their major arguments for fighting. Because the South had framed the war in terms of a states' rights issue, if the Union removes the right to own slaves, that leaves them with what to fight for. The idea was that this would allow Lincoln to remove a driving force from the South while keeping the loyalty of the border states. Additionally, this lets Lincoln change the tone of the war from one about keeping the Union together to one about keeping the morality of the Union. We should get rid of slavery because it's the right thing to do. If the Emancipation Proclamation didn't free slaves, then what the heck did it actually do? Well, let's take a look at it. So the warning gets dropped on September in 1862, and it gave the South roughly 100 days to get it together and give up. Well, we all know they didn't. That meant that Lincoln has to play his hand. On January 1st, 1863, Lincoln releases the Emancipation Proclamation, which frees all the slaves in areas that are still in rebellion. He states that this document is a fit and necessary war measure for suppressing said rebellion, and goes further to specifically list the areas that are affected by this proclamation. Ironically, some parts of the South aren't even included, because they're under Union control at that time, which released them from this proclamation. This means that, for example, Virginia had all of its slaves freed, except for the 48 counties which had split off and decided to become West Virginia and stay with the Union. Once he frees the slaves, he makes a request of them. He asks that they avoid all violence unless it is necessary in self-defense, and recommends to them that in cases when it's allowed, that they stay where they are and labor for reasonable wages. He means stay at the plantation and get paid. He urges them also to not attack their former masters and instead work there, which is going to be kind of hard for some of those people to do. He also offers that such persons of suitable conditions will be received into the armed services of the United States to garrison forts, positions, stations, and other places, and to man vessels of all sorts in said service. This means that newly freed slaves who are in good enough shape can join the U.S. Army to serve. Let's take a step back and look at this realistically though. Abraham Lincoln, President of the United States of America, issues an order to southern states that have come to see themselves as a separate country no longer connected to the United States. To further the problem, slaves had been kept legally illiterate, which means they would have to rely on someone else to read them or give them this information. And it's pretty rare to find the slave that could read. Additionally, just because the president declared you free doesn't affect your daily life. If you refuse to work on the plantation because you've been freed, let's be real, the punishment would not have been pleasant. So Lincoln issued an order that didn't do anything really to help slaves in the country. Man, he kind of sucks as president, doesn't he? Wait a second, kid in the back. This proclamation may not have directly affected slaves, but it did lay the powerful and dramatic groundwork towards the end of slavery. 2 years later, after the Emancipation Proclamation, the United States passed the 13th Amendment. Section 1. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as punishment for a crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States, or any place subject to their jurisdiction. Section 2. Congress shall have the power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation. This amendment was the first amendment in 61 years, and that goes on to show you how important it is. This amendment bans forced labor except in the case of prisoners, and it sets up the fact that Congress has the power to ensure that slavery is no longer present in our country. Again, you're about to ask, who cares if the North passed this? It doesn't affect the South. Wrong again. Once the North, the U.S., won the war against the South, they were only allowed to come back into the country if they ratified or agreed to the 13th Amendment. And the dates of ratification are going to scroll by here. They didn't actually free the slaves in any meaningful number, except for the important idea that freeing a single slave could be seen as a meaningful event. But he did lay the groundwork for eventual emancipation of all slaves, as well as developing the push that makes these free slaves citizens and would give them, quote, full rights. That is, until black codes and Jim Crow laws, but that's going to have to be a separate video. Let's hit up our segment for Subscriber of the Week. This week, I would like to send a shout out to King Bean. Thanks for watching, and keep it up. Let's move on to Question of the Day. After finding out everything that we have about the Emancipation Proclamation, do you think that Lincoln's actions justify his nickname as the Great Emancipator? Or is it an overblown title that he doesn't really deserve? Let me know down in the comments below. Thanks for watching Learning with Sprayberry, where we make social studies fun, easy, and educational. See you next time.